Okay, welcome everyone to our Data-Driven Design webinar. This is the first in the Form 1 creative series that focuses specifically on the relationship between creative design and data visualization. You can join the conversation through the questions panel on the right-hand side of your screen, as well as through Twitter. We're at the handle @Forum1, and we're using the hashtag Forum1. And of course, if you forget about that last bit, the hashtag is going to remain on the footer of all of our slides. So let's start by telling you a little bit about us. My name is Christina Crawley. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Form 1, and I'm going to be moderating today's discussion. Also here with me are the men of the hour, our main presenters, Tim Shaw, who is our User Experience Design Manager, and Corey Jones, who is our Creative Team's Art Director. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Form 1, just very briefly, we're a global full-service digital agency. We work with mission-driven organizations to help them create stunning designs, smart messaging, and any sort of custom-built tech and tools that will allow them to reach their goals and extend their influence in the areas that they're working in. We are headquartered in Alexandria, Virginia, and we've got additional offices in downtown Washington, D.C., Seattle, Washington, as well as Cologne, Germany. Now, in terms of the Creative Plus series, so today is Creative Plus data. Form 1 launched the Creative Plus series earlier this year in February, and our idea was to explore the intersection of creative design in other areas of practice, so such as content, analytics, UX, tech, and data that we're talking about today, to really help you strategize how you approach your digital spaces. So over the course of the year, our experts have been conducting webinars, such as this one, running hands-on in-person workshops, and sharing a number of blog post resources. So in fact, the Creative Plus Data webinar that we're doing today is the fourth part of the series so far. So in case you've missed any of the previous events and you're interested in following up on topics such as Creative Plus Content, or Creative Plus Analytics, or Creative Plus UX, feel free to go to that link that's there on the page. It's the go.form1.com/creative plus, and it's got all the recordings of all the webinars that we've done so far, additional resources, and of course, you'll be able to see this link again because we're going to be sharing the recording with you over the next couple of days. So really excited to have you here, excited to be kicking off the Creative Plus Data series. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to our data and design experts, Tim and Corey.
Welcome, everyone. This is Corey, and you're probably thinking, creative in data, is it possible? Well, spoiler alert, no, it's not about adding flames to your next pie chart. Today, we're going to talk about how these seemingly different disciplines are actually best when paired together. You can present data to your audience, but if you really want them to engage with it, absorb the facts, or trigger an emotional response, you must infuse a bit of creativity and design. So while the subjects are different, we'll see that they're actually better together. Okay. So put differently, we're both Macs, but I'm design and vision, and say Tim is Excel and UX Pen. But great design is really about problem solving. So and to do that, we have to work together. When I approach any project, it's about solving a problem, and really that just gets down to what design is. So I'm trying to identify ways to approach the situation, and then honing in those two down to the best option. My particular focus is on branding. Providing unique ways for the audience to engage with the brand. How about you, Tim?
So I come to data visualization as a user experience designer and strategist. So like Corey, I'm starting by focusing on the goals at hand and who this implies reaching. But I'm also concerned about how the data gets portrayed and whether audiences can understand it correctly. This focus ensures the presenter's credibility and the success of the data products. It's worth noting that together we represent only some pieces of the data viz. In particular, researchers, data scientists, who many of you may work with. They collect, they deeply analyze the data. They're really critical pieces of the project. And we're not focusing on this area today, but know that you have to have someone or ones with that focus on your data team.
So yeah, so some key points that we're going to talk about today is number one, visual data is like any other piece of content. You must first understand the goal you have for presenting the data and to whom you intend to reach with it. That's your audience. Just like any other user experience challenge, the focus on the goal and the audience doesn't change. Your data viz, number two, your data viz needs to support and be intertwined with your brand. Yes, this is about infusing your brand's visual style, but it's also about asking bigger questions of how your visualizations convey the message and what tone it suggests.
Yeah, so we're going to discuss how great data visualizations marry the rigor of data practices with a creative spark that brings different approaches and ideas. The result is going to be, we believe, more engaging, but still a fair piece. And you need both sides in the right amount. And we hope to leave you with some structures, some conventions, and in general, a framework within which you can be creative.
All right, so Tim, why don't you go ahead and tell us what the heck we mean by data?
So data, yeah. What is it? So here's a set of definitions from a variety of sources. Note that facts, the word facts is in all of them. Data is about nuggets of facts, firm evidence, objective truth. Many of us think about numbers and other hard information. There's this sort of rigor. In practice, many of you think about it in the context of displaying research, results, findings, and in many cases, this is going to be some of your most crown jewel content. Data can and should provide important understanding, help decision making, maybe even provoke action. When we talk about data visualization, then, it's really the practice of presenting data to audiences in ways that they can see, if you will. As we'll talk about, hopefully, we'll show that it really covers a range of products and outputs. Now, Corey, creative, that's a big word.
Yeah, and creative is one of those things. It's often confused with visual design, when in fact design is just a piece of the puzzle. You know, creative encompasses the practice of thinking of new and imaginative ways to turn brand ideas into reality. You know, this involves seeing the world from different angles, finding hidden patterns, making connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. So translating these complex ideas into accessible ones is a big point, and it's all with the goal of generating better communication solutions. And really, that, you know, this turns out to be a critical rigor of data as well. So now let's go to Beethoven live in the studio. Who knew Beethoven could be so creative? So Tim, why the heck are we looking at sheet music, and how is that related to data?
Yes, but it is. So to complete the introduction, I'm going to use an analogy I saw somewhere years ago, don't remember when. But yeah, sheet music is data. You may not think about it as such, but it is. It conveys information about what notes to play, when, and how. So here's how this particular set of data can be conveyed.
Okay, we're going to play a short little clip here. If everybody's listening, here we go.
So this is a perfectly correct interpretation of Mr. Beethoven's data set. It has the right notes, more or less the right pace. But it isn't very engaging, is it, right? It's just notes. There's not really that emotional connection. Here's the same data with the creative layer added. So the second version, it has this full arrangement, yes, but what it really has is a flow. There's sort of a connection between the notes. And in short, it has feeling. It's music. The first was a collection of notes. That was music. And what we're really talking about today is how to make data like we think about have that same connection. We want the data to have an accurate display of information, but it'll also be engaging content that leads to understanding and action. And that's really what Creative Plus data is all about. By the way, credit going out to 14-year-old Antonio Ramirez, son of one of our colleagues, budding musical genius. He played both of those pieces for us by memory. So we're going to start by showing two data presentations that haven't had enough creative input. And then we're going to go to the other extreme and look at the tensions that can arise between creative and data and think about when creative can go too far. And finally, we'll move to showing some examples of where the marriage of creative and data is effective in different ways. At one end of the spectrum is obviously your basic raw data. It provides the information accurately, it can be dressed up a little even, and it can be the right solution in some cases. But especially beyond a certain point in size, it tends not to be easy to see the stories, especially for non-numbers people.
Yeah, the raw data, it really isn't engaging, and the message isn't clear. Oh, by the way, this is actually some fake data for Pacific Well Conservancy, which we'll get to in just a bit.
Charts don't necessarily help. Here's one that lacks a strong creative component. It's basically, this is just straight out of Excel, defaults, and so forth. Now, it does display the data accurately, but it's pretty difficult to see the stories still. The chart is just using the same raw data from the slide before. It doesn't really consider what that data is trying to say. And because the scale is so wide, the poor right whales, which are the last data series, get left off. By all rights, that's wrong.
Well, using Excel, softwares like Excel, I mean, you can achieve a lot. But right here, it's just, default colors and fonts, and it looks kind of boring. And I see this a lot, and it does make me yawn. But it can definitely be better.
Yeah, it definitely is common to see even in sort of less extreme cases, and you can do better. So if the first examples highlight an absence of creative thought, it's worth noting the needs for accurate display of data and creative interest can be in tension. So this was a really fascinating discussion in the data visualization community last year. There was about this chart on the left. It was illustrating the timeline for the Arab Spring. The original chart here looks interesting. It's engaging, but you start looking at it more deeply, it has some real technical problems. It's what we call a circular or radial bar chart. One problem is that reading it properly requires that you kind of have to read it in a circle and kind of tilt your head around. And that's obviously hard, not the greatest experience. A bigger problem is that the way the geometry of a circle works, the distance for each bar does not match the others. The bars towards the center are shorter for the same period of time than the ones on the outside. So that creates a little distortion in the data. There's a third problem that humans don't tend to read arcs as well as square rectangular shapes. And this is why you have to be careful with pies and donut charts, by the way. Finally, metaphors are important, I always find. A circle tends to imply wholeness and completeness. So they tend to make sense in cases like pie charts where you're talking about parts of a whole. There's some semblance of a whole here in that there's this sort of 13-month span, but the bars really don't represent components of that whole in the same way. The alternative on the right was what a guy named Alberto Cairo did as a reaction, and it is more technically correct in that it puts things in the right, all at the right lengths. You can kind of scan across more easily, but it's really not as engaging. So it tends to be that you reach this point where you do get into tension between how does it display the data and how to be engaging. It's just a reality.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, you could look at this thing and you could think, well, we're on brand, we have our colors, we're using our fonts, but really, it's at the expense of the end user. You're really not doing anything. This is a classic case of being over-designed. You have to remember, data is meant to be absorbed. Creative should only enhance its clarity, and that's an important point to make and something you should consider as you approach any new challenge. But now let's look at something a little bit provocative.
Yes, that may not have been what you were expecting, but decoration. On the left is a famous example you may have seen or heard about. It was done by a prominent information designer named Nigel Holmes. And DataViz luminary Edward Tufte lambastes it in one of his books, calling displays like this chart junk. Tufte advocates uncluttered, total focus on the data for clarity and credibility, as you get on the right side here. And what you have to think about, though, is what are you losing there? There's actually some little bit of research to begin to support that keeping some of what Tufte calls ink can help engage, and without it, you tend to have a chart with no joy, as Cairo once said. The key message here is to engage but not distract. The one on the left kind of works okay because it uses color, that powerful red, to draw a focus. But what you really want to avoid is stuff like background images on charts or, God forbid, 3D, things which distract from the data or at worst distort it. And they're probably adding more confusion than creating engagement. Again, there's sort of tension and continuum here. But that said, there are some clear cases. You've heard the expression lies, damn lies in statistics. Well, add in DataViz. There are far too many cases of getting, quote, too creative, unquote, and outright manipulating a visualization to provide a false conclusion. This is a case of a bar that had its poor y-axis clipped. So in fact, the 0 point is way below the screen, and you're just looking at the tops of the bars, giving a very distorted view of how close they really are. This kind of misshaping, missizings are kind of common offenders here. And please be honest in showing your data. So now let's look at the right mix. Let's look at this one. This is a chart where we're showing the educational performance of the District of Columbia, part of our work we did for the National Assessment of Educational Progress. One thing to note is this is produced ultimately by a federal statistical agency. It's rigorously correct with the data. So for example, if you were to look at this across the product it lives in, the y-axis scale is consistent across all charts, no matter the data, so that you can always look across them and see that the same slope means the same thing. It provides some good additional context. So we add in the advanced, proficient, and basic achievement levels, so you can see how the scores map to them. And there's ample legends here, not just what the symbols mean, but also information that is about the statistical significance. It also it's well branded in the sense that it uses the colors intelligently. The blue here is our brand blue, as is the gold that we use for our action color, and then we bring in the turquoise to show it's sort of our focal color. So we're using the colors of the brand in some ways that make sense.
Yeah, and this graphic considers all readers. We deliberately chose these symbols for accessibility concerns, and because color alone was not acceptable. So you can really see how accessibility constraints impact design. Okay, so here we go. Here is an example from USDA's Farm to School, and this is more of an infographic, which is another form of a data set. One thing about these is that makes these really effective is a good use of illustrations paired with bold, punchy typography. The numbers are the key here. Everything else is meant to enhance that. We also use colors to really draw you in, and if you take a step back and look at these, you really see these numbers sort of stand out, and later on we can provide a lot of these links and you can kind of go explore it a little bit further.
Corey talked a little bit about the creative enhancing the display. Here's an example of design choices that don't just engage, but can be critical in bringing out the story. This is a New York Times piece. It's one frame of an interactive. But note how the red, which is for the trend for the U.S., really pops out. It's deliberately a little busy in the sense that there's all these lines on here representing the trend for all these different countries. But they use the red, that's just this one space, to pop out the U.S., because that's really the story here, that its performance on this measure hasn't been as strong. And then there's blues to represent 3 European country comparators to show that they either started better and or made increased progress.
Yeah, knowing the goal is key. At first I looked at this and I thought it was too busy, but then I saw what they were really trying to show. The use of color here really does stand out, and what they did a good job of is using contrast to sort of create depth. So you notice the red, and then you see the blue, and then you see the key points, key numbers sort of highlighted. So really, it's actually very cleverly put together. All right, let's look at a bit of a more creative approach here. So we much like the music example, think of one wouldn't think that that's a data set, but it actually is. But this case here is actually a menu, and this is from a restaurant in Pittsburgh. And what they've done is they've actually sort of created this, we like to call these exploratory graphics or exploratory data sets. And this is really the menu. And if you follow this journey with them and you answer each of these questions, at the end you will see which burger you should choose. This is actually really big on the wall in the restaurant, and they have it sitting alongside with other menus. But you really can see how they infuse the brand. There's texture in here. There's the good use of the color red to sort of draw out the key messages, and they're using their fonts. The tone in which this is written is all within the brand. It's a very, very loose and casual sort of framework here, but you can really see how creativity was implied and applied in this case.
Yeah, you don't necessarily think of a menu as a data set, but it really is, right? It's got information about what is available to eat and a price associated with it. It's a simple data set, but it is one.
So we can really be creative, but how do we get there? So let's talk about some structures here. Where do you begin? How do you start doing visualizations? So we're going to take a look at some basic structures. The best place to start is, first and foremost is understanding the goal. So, I like to ask questions. What are we trying to accomplish with this visualization? Who is this intended to reach, and what level of understanding of the topic they have? Because that's important. And also, where will this be seen? Is it on a website, or is it going to be printed? Should it be static? It sort of uncovers these sort of answers as we go on. But on the data side, I guess, what are some things, Tim?
Yeah, so the next is sort of thinking about the data. And again, we aren't data scientists. There's a whole lot on this subject. But kind of in short, on the one hand, you need to make sure your data is clean, it's complete. There's no duplicates or crazy outliers, no issues with formulae. You've done all the proper statistical work. Once that's done, you need to take a look at it if it isn't yours. Is the source credible? If you found this data and think, oh man, this is going to help me, but it's produced by somebody that your audiences are just going to, write off from the get-go, well, it's no help. Once you've got that in hand and you've got a set that's good and it's credible and what have you, study it. What is it really telling you? What are the stories that are in it? Again, you need to work from what the data is telling you, not what you want it to say. Which brings to the last point. Consider it. Does it fairly support your goals? If you've got a data set that's rock solid and has some interesting information, but it doesn't tell the reader anything about what you want it to, it may be something that you have to set aside or at least use in a different way. Next, we get to sort of the overall experience that you're trying to have with your data product. And this 2x2 matrix done by a guy named John Schwabish is a really useful way for thinking about this at a high level. On one hand, you want to think about, are you trying to do something static, just an image or something that's going to go in a print product and is just going to sit there, the user's going to look at it? Or do you want something dynamic where the user in some way interacts with it? Probably over a website, but as the menu showed, it could be in a physical space done the right way. So that's one dynamic, and obviously a static one can be simpler, may or may not be less engaging. Dynamic one, likewise, can be quite complex, can be quite engaging, but if not done right, can be all kinds of confusing and muddle the message. The other axis is, are you trying to have an explanatory situation where you are telling the user, the reader, what you want them to take away from the data? You're going to walk them through a story. And again, that could be in a single chart where you sort of say, this is the data that you need to focus on. Or it could be something like the Times Interactives or others like that, where they walk you through at your own pace and build a story for you.
Yeah, I really like this chart. When Tim showed it to me, I found it really, really helpful just to figure out how to, what direction to take the design process. So I really love seeing this type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. And just the other dimension is of course exploratory. Do you want the user to go through and figure out what they want to take away from it? Again, there can be a static form, a really big, complex infographic effectively serves as this. You're providing some information, letting the user pick it out. But the most common one you think about it is some form of a data browser or some way that the user can interact and pull out their own stories. Finally, you get to thinking about what actual charts to use. And note that we've deliberately put this at the end. You really have to do the work up front before you get to the quote-unquote fun part here of thinking about this. There's a number of models like this to choose from, a number of charts out there. This is one kind of model that we became aware of and is a good one to think about what kind of chart works best for what you're trying to show. Given the data you have, given the purpose, there are commonly accepted chart types that have commonly accepted purposes. And this may well be a case where you don't need to be that creative, that you have a tried and true option. If you're showing a trend over a long time, a line chart is probably going to be pretty good, for example. So there are, as I said, other tools, but think about the different chart options that exist and what they give you from the get-go.
In short, sometimes you need a chart to show you how to pick the right chart.
Indeed. Now, finally, of course, the universe is expanding. The data viz world is very hot right now. There's a lot of ideas out there, and new forms, creative forms of visualization are popping up all the time. Like this one from 538, which, if you can't tell, has the U.S. Done up in hexagons, each state sized proportionally to its number of electoral college votes. It looks a little weird if you're thinking of what the U.S. looks like, although you can begin to see the rough outline if you look hard enough. But it actually is a pretty effective way to see that as of this point in time and as of this model, the advantages for Hillary Clinton, based on the Electoral College votes and sizings and so forth, were more compelling. So you have new options. There is room to be creative all the time. Now, if only we had an example of doing all this in practice, Corey.
And we do. Okay, so let's take a look at a real life scenario. If for those who've been following along in the Creative Plus series, we've created a fictitious organization called the Pacific Whale Conservancy. And so remember that fake data set that we looked at before. We're going to take a little bit more of a deeper dive into that. So who is PwC? PwC is a mission whose core goal is about improving the waters of the Pacific Northwest and allowing it to be a safe and inhabitable environment for whales and other marine species. So now let's take a look at that raw data again. You know, let's think about what we really want to do with this data. You know, we want to show trends in population over time. We want to showcase changes in how PwC's work touches them, and also create something that is static and explanatory, and something that also showcases the different species that inhabit those waters.
So let's see what we have here in this data set, and we can first look at the source here. This comes from the University of Washington, which we know well. The Center for Marine Sciences may or may not exist. But we can probably assume that this is a good, highly credible source for information. The data looks complete. It's already been kind of cleaned up and aggregated. We're kind of taking it as a given that that stuff has happened. So how can we best use it for our purposes? Seems like we could point out changes in whale populations over time and where successes and challenges for the Pacific Whale Conservancy fit. And that should spur our audiences to action and support, what have you. One thing that we're going to have to think about, and this showed up on the Excel chart we showed at the outset, you may remember, is that these species have vastly different sizes in terms of numbers of individuals, and are so by an order of magnitude. So the poor northern Pacific right whales, there just are not a lot of them at all. But there's, relatively speaking, a decent amount of humpback and gray whales, so putting them on the same chart may be a problem. So one way to approach this is not to put them on the same chart. Let's give each of the species its own focus, but still enable comparing. So doing that, here's what Excel spit out, again, by its sort of default self.
So let's look at this. You know, we have 4 charts here. You know, we can see this data can be done better. Do we need the access points? Do we need the grid lines? You know, how can the colors and fonts sort of play up the brand's tone a little bit more? Let's go to the next one here. So looking at this one, we've kind of cleaned it up a bit. We took away the access lines and we added some points in there. And now you can, at a glance, you can see how these sort of compare across and sort of really highlights. But I think we can take it a step further.
Yeah, and one thing before we go there to point out sort of a technical thing that we did with this version, Excel out of the box took each series, each whale population trend, and put it on its own axis, but they weren't related to each other. So you have these cases of the gray whales and the humpback whales that had large changes in population in absolute numbers, but relative to their whole sizes, they were actually smaller. So what we did with this version is worked on the y-axis scales to make sure that when you look across the four species, the magnitude of changes are correct for the actual relative changes. And you see that the humpback whales and the gray whales actually have had slower population changes in this fictitious data set.
All right, so let's look at our final iteration here. So what we did here is we updated the chart to match the brand, and that includes its colors, type, and graphical elements. There's some subtle enhancements, such as using the red to show just the stressing point, and then using the green to show that the key turning points that things took a positive turn. We highlighted this whale species very prominently across, so that way you can compare at a glance. All this is done within the tone of the brand and typography, colors, and everything to sort of really wrap it together in a much better package.
And I want to highlight again the sort of the annotations that we added. They were in this kind of fictitious data world that we were playing with. Let's suppose that Pacific Whale Conservancy had some points where it interacted with the population in some positive way, and where there were exogenous factors that affected the population, either those that were man-made, if you will, or that were not. This allows us to sort of highlight particular points where the organization could rally its troops and sort of say, this is something that we did well, and so you can support us. Or this is an area where something happened, we don't know what happened, but we need to research it, and we need your support for that.
All right, so we can't cover everything within a webinar. But these are some key points that I want to leave you with. Good UX starts with knowing your goals. Data is a content type. Remember to treat data as a piece of content. And then a strong emphasis on branding. Infuse that tone, infuse that look and feel. And remember, creative plus data equals higher retention. Data is meant to be absorbed, as I said, but it has to be clear.
Yeah, you really need the rigor of data matched with the spark of creativity, that engagement, to bring it both about. And hopefully we've given you some tools for doing that, a sense of what a process might look like.
Tim and I actually are going to be hosting a workshop through General Assembly, which Tina can tell you about, and you'll receive that in your follow-up. But we really hope that this was helpful. We thank all of you for joining us. And remember that, just go out there, create something cool, but at the same time, remember it's about clarity, so don't overdo it.
Great, thanks guys, and good timing because this gives us some time to go over some questions that you might have. If you do have questions, feel free to type those in the questions box. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen, just a little bit separate from where you're seeing the slides. But we do have some already, so maybe we can address those. But before we do, Corey did just mention that we're going to have a follow-up workshop as well. And so if you are in the Washington, D.C. area, we have a hands-on workshop that'll be a follow-up to what Tim and Corey have discussed today in more detail. And so that's going to take place in downtown Washington at our Washington, D.C. office on September 27th. When we send you the recording in the next couple of days, we're going to send you that information as well. You could also find it on the Form 1 website and also in the Creative Plus section of the website. So that's just a little side tidbit, but let's get to some of the questions that we've got already. The first was actually a shout out. Corey, your designs are stunning. Annika would like to compliment you on those and was wondering if you made them in InDesign or Illustrator. What did you make them in?
Thank you for the compliment. I actually made those in Illustrator, but there's various other tools out there that we work with. It really depends on the solution, but yeah, in this case we used Illustrator. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. We have a question here from Alonso. He's wondering, he first off says, great presentation. And he's wondering if there are some free tools that you might recommend to do, first of all, charts, second of all, data viz, and third of all, infographics.
The short answer is yes, there are, and I really wish I had some off the top of my head. I believe one of the more popular tools out there is Tableau. There's a sort of a fully functional paid version, but I believe there is a basic free version that is available that you can get going with. There's a lot of them out there, and I would take a look around you.
Yeah, there's on the infographic side, I remember a software we used a while back called Pictograph, and it has a lot of pre-generated sort of graphics. But Alonzo, let me take a look and see if I can find anything, and maybe that's something we can provide in our follow-up, and so you can have that for.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay, great. And I think, Maria, you had also asked any online tools to present data. That's probably very similar to what Alonso is asking, so we can kind of wrap that up into some of our follow-up.
Yeah, I would sort of on the tools front, I think sort of on the broader front of, sort of free versus online, I would say, we used Excel as kind of a bad guy a little bit in the presentation, but that's not to say that it really is. It's a tool like any other. You can use it for good, you can use it for evil, but you can do very good stuff with Excel. You just have to kind of get into it a little bit and undo some of its defaults. So put in your own colors, use your own typography, and futz with the settings and so forth to remove some of the stuff that it puts in that isn't necessary. It's a perfectly good way to produce stuff. And then if you have someone like Corey to just sort of buff it up a little bit more, so much the better. A lot of what we do is sort of at the other end of the spectrum, which is worth talking about, is that there's a lot of powerful tools for interactive work. We use D3, which is a JavaScript library, a lot for our interactive work. And it's an extremely powerful tool for making, really quite flexible kinds of visualizations that interact in real time with data sources and so forth. There are others along the spectrum, and others out there, but there's a whole range of tools from the simple through the Tableau to the D3s and so forth that are out there covering a range of applications.
Yeah, just one thing to kind of clarify my last statement. It's actually PIK2TO chart.com. That's another software out there, and they have some models for nonprofits. They really have some great out-of-the-box graphics, and maybe something for y'all to consider.
Okay, great. Our next question is from Joseph, and he's wondering, in producing creatives, is user feedback or user input solicited and utilized during the development process?
Yes, I mean, user feedback is welcomed at every stage. It's not so much at I guess in the terms of this of these infographics, and if say we're talking about a web application before we get into interactive, We want to get as much information early on as possible. So anytime we can pull in sort of user testing or users feedback, it's definitely key. It's definitely key for the creative process because at the end of the day, we're trying to solve a problem together, and it takes a bit of both. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Tim.
Yeah, we've been doing quite a bit of usability testing on our work with NAEP, National Assessment of Education Progress. What we find is that we do it before, sometimes we're able to do it after in many cases, but we can really use it fairly well to understand how users are reading even a chart. So it's not just how they interact with the site as a whole, but are they picking up the messages? Are they able to read the legends or finding key information that we want them to find? You can set up questions that get at these questions of are people able to take away the messages that you really want them to from a visualization? So yeah, if you can do that whilst you're designing and so forth, so much the better.
Okay. And actually, just as a follow-up, Joseph was wondering how are you actually garnering that input and feedback?
Yeah, so as I say, we've been doing it a lot in the context of usability testing. So gathering a small set of representative audience members, and we present the product to them, usually remotely with a web conference kind of situation, and ask them to complete tasks, which could be answering questions contained in the visualization, and just record how well they are able to learn from it, to use it, to see take away the messages. What are they drawn to? What are they don't seem to be drawn to? And that guides our future work quite significantly.
Great. We've got a scenario question from Lily. Have you ever had to back up a design decision when your user or your client wanted something probably a little more boring, or something that doesn't really display the data as well as you think it could? And what do you do in that situation? What do you tell them? How do you react?
Absolutely, and almost always, like, and what we do in our particular industry, I find myself always having to prove my case, and at Forum One, we kind of have a good mix of visual designers, and paired with UX designers in most of our projects. So you have to go in and you have to clearly state the goal. You have to constantly remind the client of the goal, and then sort of if you're starting there, they understand the goal, and especially if they've on the goal and everybody's sort of on the same page, you go in strong with your goal, and then you just relate every decision you've made in that design based on the goal. Because we wanted to do this, we took this approach. And yeah, I mean it's challenging, but it's definitely worth the battle. And the key thing is really reiterating the goal.
Yeah, and sometimes I find you can figure out where you can infuse ideas, creativity, and where you just aren't going to be able to. If you have particularly strong data standards at your organization, and that just means that you have to include some set of information on all charts and so forth, and you can say, well, it's really cluttering it up, but it's sort of part of, in a sense, it's part of the brand, right? It's who they are to be that rigorous. But maybe there are ways that you can dial it back a little bit. Can we convey this information, but just sort of do it in a little toned down way, using colors or a different type treatment? Can you play down, some of the notes and so forth? Do they all need to display? Can you hide them? There are various kind of middle ways to go to try and get there. But fundamentally, it's it is always a challenge. The more you can get data, the better. the more you can focus on the goal, as Corey said.
Yeah, and sometimes as designers, we sort of like want to sort of enforce our sort of sensibilities on people, but if you take a step back and look at the graphic and really think about who you're designing it for, you're going to have you'll have a better perspective on the right approach. And it's really sometimes it is it is sort of trying to please the client, but if we just remind them that, hey, you and the client, we're designing this for this audience, and this is what they like to see.
Okay, great. There was a small suggestion from Ava about free data visual tools. She had suggested maybe there was the Tableau public version. Technically, your data set is going to be public, but that's an option, as well as Canva. And that also, if you are a nonprofit, as many of you are, there might be a reduced price or license deal that you could get for Tableau Pro or Illustrator from TechSoup. So that's a suggestion from Ava.
Thanks.
Thank you.
A question about raw data. So should, the idea of trying to find a nicer way to display your data so that people are really able to react to it, should you not be providing raw data at all?
No, I would not say that in any respect. There are some audiences that strongly prefer having it. You can do the nicest presentation in the world, but they're going to go straight to the data. I'm thinking of the researchers tend to just they want to crunch their own numbers and so forth. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a wonderful wonderful task for them. So you do want to make it accessible so that people who do want to dig into the depth of it can. There's another reason to keep it pretty handy, particularly if you're talking about an online context. When we talk about data visualization, it's wonderful, but it includes the word visual, obviously. And if you are not as visually abled, you cannot interact with these presentations in the same way. So one helpful way to handle that is to provide the data behind a particular chart in some fairly convenient way that somebody who's using a screen reader or other assistive device can gain access to it as well. So it provides an accessibility value being there as well. So you don't necessarily need to lead with it, but you do want to make it conveniently, obviously, available for those who do want to get at it.
Okay, great. I think that might be it in terms of the questions that we have. Again, if you do have some follow-up questions, you're welcome to write to us at info@forum1.com, and we can have either Tim or Corey or both of them to get back to you directly. And then we ourselves are going to be in touch in the next couple days to get you the recording of today's session, as well as some, follow-up kind of recap and resource ideas, and then get you that information for those of you who are here in the Washington, D.C. area. If you would like to attend our workshop, it's a free workshop. It's going to take place from 6 to 8 p.m. on September 27th. And kind of like go through some of these examples. We'll probably use the Pacific Whale Conservancy example and have you guys work on some activities around that as well. So huge thanks to both of you, Tim and Corey, for leading today's session. All of you who attended, really happy that you were able to take the time. We hope that it was helpful. And do check out the other Creative Plus resources that we do have and other recordings, and stay in touch. We're looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, all.
Okay, thanks everybody.